Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy. A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of vintage cars, designer suits filling walk-in closets, and a banking empire that bore his family name. But on a gray October afternoon, standing frozen in the doorway of his 12-year-old daughter's bedroom, he realized he knew nothing at all about the person who mattered most. There she was, Emma, his beautiful, bright-eyed daughter, kneeling on the carpet with a spoon in her hand and an open can of dog food beside her. She was eating it. Actually eating it, one careful spoonful at a time, her face scrunched in concentration as she swallowed. Marcus felt his briefcase slip from his fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a thud that echoed through the hallway. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something that looked like guilt mixed with defiance. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to tilt sideways as Marcus tried to process what he was seeing. "Emma, what on earth are you doing?" His voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. She quickly set down the spoon, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Dad, I didn't think you'd be home so early." "That's what you have to say?" Marcus stepped into the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Why are you eating dog food? Are you sick? Has someone been hurting you? My God, Emma, we have a chef who makes 3 meals a day." Emma stood up, her thin frame seeming even smaller in her oversized school uniform. At 12, she was already developing that teenage tendency to retreat into herself, but Marcus had attributed it to normal adolescent moodiness. Now, looking at her pale face and the purple shadows under her eyes, he wondered what else he'd been missing. "I'm not sick," she said quietly, "and nobody's hurting me." "Then explain this to me, please." Marcus sank onto her bed, his expensive suit suddenly feeling suffocating. "Help me understand." Emma glanced at the can of dog food, beef and gravy, he noted with horror, then back at her father. "Do you know Mrs. Patterson from 4B? Marcus blinked at the sudden change in subject. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman from down the hall. He'd seen her maybe twice in the elevator, always nodded politely, never bothered to actually speak to her. "The older lady?" "She's 78, Emma said. "She has arthritis in both hands, and her daughter moved to California 2 years ago. She lives on a fixed income, Social Security, and it's not enough. Not in New York City. Not for rent and utilities and medicine?" Marcus listened, a cold dread beginning to form in his stomach as he started to piece together where this was going. "She has a dog," Emma continued. "Charlie. He's a sweet old golden retriever, and he's her only company most days. But last month I ran into Mrs. Patterson in the hallway, and she was crying. She told me she had to choose between buying her heart medication or dog food for Charlie. She said she couldn't stand the thought of Charlie going hungry, so she skipped refilling her prescription. "Emma," Marcus began, but she wasn't finished. "So I started buying dog food with my allowance, enough for Charlie and for her too. I told her that if she was going to skip meals to feed Charlie, at least the dog food was nutritious enough to keep her from getting sicker. She laughed at first, thought I was joking, but I was serious. I researched it. Some dog food has more protein and vitamins than the ramen noodles she was living on." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "You've been feeding an elderly woman dog food?" "She refused at first," Emma said, her voice growing passionate. "She has too much pride. So I told her I'd eat it first to prove it was safe. And I did. Every day after school, I'd go to her apartment and we'd eat together. She started calling it our tea time, except instead of tea and biscuits, we'd have dog food and crackers. She made jokes about it. It made her smile." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Marcus stared at his daughter, this child he thought he knew, and saw a stranger. A beautiful, compassionate, heartbreaking stranger who had been living a completely different life than the one he'd imagined for her. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. "Emma, do you have any idea how much money we have?" "I could have helped Mrs. Patterson. I still can." Emma shook her head. "I tried, Dad. Remember 3 months ago when I asked if we could donate to that senior assistance program? You said you were too busy with the merger. And when I asked if we could volunteer at the food bank on Saturdays, you said I needed to focus on my piano lessons and SAT prep." Her voice cracked slightly. "You're always too busy, Dad. Too busy for charity, too busy for anything that isn't making more money. Each word landed like a stone on Marcus's chest. He opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain that he worked so hard to give her everything. But the words died in his throat, because she was right. When had he last really listened to her? When had he last done something that didn't revolve around wealth and status? "You have so much," Emma whispered, and now there were tears streaming down her face. "We have so much." And right down the hall, Mrs. Patterson was choosing between her medicine and feeding her dog. How is that possible? How do we live in a world where that happens? Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled his daughter into his arms. She was stiff at first, but then she collapsed against him, sobbing into his expensive shirt. He held her tight. This incredible child who had seen a problem and solved it the only way she knew how, even if it meant eating dog food herself to preserve an elderly woman's dignity. "I'm so sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry." They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, while the afternoon light faded through the windows. When Emma finally pulled away, Marcus cupped her face in his hands. "Take me to meet Mrs. Patterson," he said, "right now." 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself sitting in a cramped apartment that smelled faintly of lavender and dog, listening to a gracious elderly woman thank his daughter for being the best friend an old lady could ask for. Charlie, the golden retriever, had his head in Emma's lap, his tail thumping contentedly against the worn carpet. Marcus learned that Mrs. Patterson had been a teacher for 40 years, that her husband had died a decade ago, that medical bills from his cancer treatment had wiped out their savings. He learned about the impossible choices seniors faced every day in one of the richest cities in the world. And he learned that his daughter had been making a real difference, one small act of kindness at a time, while he'd been counting his millions in a glass tower. Before he left that evening, Marcus wrote a check that would cover Mrs. Patterson's expenses for the next 5 years. He also hired her as a consultant for a new foundation he decided to create on the spot, one that would help seniors age in place with dignity. Mrs. Patterson would help identify others who needed assistance. But more importantly, Marcus took his daughter's hand as they walked back to their apartment and made her a promise. "I'm going to do better," he said. "We're going to do better. Together." Emma squeezed his hand. "Does that mean we can volunteer at the food bank on Saturdays?" "It means we're going to do a lot more than that," Marcus replied. "But yes, we'll start there." That night, Emma found a note slipped under her bedroom door. In her father's handwriting, it read, "Thank you for teaching me what wealth really means. It's not what we have, it's what we give. Love, Dad."